Hey y'all, we've got part 2 of Stephen Bauman's Sketch Tour here, where he and I discussed figure drawing techniques, line quality, inspirations, composition, and a bunch more. If you like how Stephen draws and you want to learn from him, you're in luck, because we just released his masterpiece demo on Proko.com/Bauman. In it, he shows you how to draw a fully shaded, realistic portrait in graphite. This is the kind of long demo I'd watch when I was in school. It's really beneficial to see the process start to finish. You might even hear his impression of Seinfeld.
What's the deal? What shape is that? There's all these shapes on the face. Why do I have to design all of them?
That's over at Proko.com/Bauman. Okay, on to the sketch tour.
Line for me is like the kind of underpinning of, I think, really good structural drawing. You know, and I also I kind of come from a world where drawing is primarily made as a preparation for painting so that you have useful, efficient drawing techniques that you can use in paint. For me, it became a whole world in itself, and though I paint, I probably draw just as much as I paint. And so
More, right? No? I see you posting a lot more drawings than painting.
That's a good point. It's in phases. There's moments where I'll draw for, when I did this giant life-size drawing that's above me here that we can see later, I was just drawing for about a year at that point, just all I was drawing projects.
Yeah.
And then you'll go through a phase where, your expression is a little bit more drawn to oil paint. Mm-hmm. But line quality was something that for me, again, I found essential. And it was actually a bit after my education that I really kind of dove more deeply into it. I just found, I was drawn to it as a kind of way to rationally explain how form appears.
How do you suggest your students improve their line quality?
It's about organization. It's about organization and also the amount of pressure that you're able to put on the paper, right? So, and in addition to that, I draw with a ton of different pencils. So I set myself up initially to have a variance in line quality. We have to think about it like a spectrum, right? You have light lines that are very thin. You have softer light lines. You have dark etched in lines. This is a whole spectrum of line quality here. And each one of these things, like a key on a map, needs to mean something in your drawing. And then you need to use it consistently. So if you're drawing, say, the ending of a form, right? So this line here is meant to really say, the leg is here, it's not here, it stops. This is an ending of form. Right. What I'm trying to communicate with these interior hatch marks is that there is a continuation of form that goes across the thigh here. If I use the same line quality here and here, I would create a really a kind of strong visual dissonance that would be very confusing and difficult to work with. Mm-hmm. So organizing line quality is all about being kind of consistent in how you're doing it, and also assigning a purpose to your line quality, right? If I'm drawing a shadow edge, right? I want that shadow edge to appear different from a form ending edge. And the same thing here. But again, I just have to be consistent throughout. In the same way that shadow shapes actually need to look different from halftone shapes. If I treated these halftone shapes with the same kind of edges that I'm treating the shadow shape, I would again be creating a kind of visual dissonance, right? It would be very hard to kind of work with and organize.
Okay, so in learning line quality, they have to learn edge.
Edges are a form of that, yeah, for sure. Or at least it dovetails into it, in the sense that maybe when you're fully getting on into values, you would say edges are more about the meetings of values, but I mean, let's be honest, there's a linear idea in that as well.
The lines you put down are representing the edges of those values, right?
At times, yeah. I mean, this I would say is more of, I'm actually just studying the beginnings and endings of forms. Yeah. More so than assigning where's the light coming into this? Could be coming in anywhere. Right. Do you know what I mean? Okay, yeah. So they're not really assigned to that. This is a very bright plane on the thigh, but I'm looking at the endings of forms. Mm. Now, the cool thing about this is that you could tell me that the light source is here, you could tell me that it's here, you could tell me that it's here, and I could draw a set of shadow shapes that would work with that assignment of light direction. Right. Just based on the knowledge of form that you have. Because we've all seen these little spheres, right? Yeah. They're fantastic as a metaphor to kind of explain the understanding of form. Right? We all understand in our minds what a sphere is, what the shape of it is, very consistent. So if I told you, Stan, who's an expert, or Brandon maybe, who's a novice, I assume. He's a photographer. He's not drawing spheres.
Artist.
If I tell you, Stan, that the light source on this sphere is coming in at a direction upper right hand, like almost behind the form, you'd be able to draw me a very convincing set of shadow edges and values that would create a modeling to that form.
I would, yeah.
Exactly, right? And if I told you the light source was from a completely different direction, you'd also be able to model that form because you understand fundamentally and completely what a sphere is shaped like. Now, when we get to like a much more complex set of forms like the thigh, where we have a dozen different forms interacting, our relative knowledge or lack of knowledge about the nature and the kind of complete sense of those forms will dictate how well we're able to assign shadow edges to them.
Right.
And so for me, line was a way to fully understand what the beginnings and endings of those forms were, so that when I did apply light and shadow to it, which eventually is the goal, I could be really eloquent and make sure that I was describing exactly what was there, instead of take the alternative that this is just an empty outline and I just draw a shadow edge through it. My incidence of inaccuracy there is going to be much higher than if I totally understand and have explored the forms inside of it. And this is the kind of thing that I thought when I first started drawing, like, come on, it's got to be too much work, right? That's got to be way too much. I can't do that much work. I'll never get anything done in my life. Well, as it turns out, you get a lot better at drawing. These things happen a lot faster. So this is just a figure study from the model room. I had maybe a couple hours with the students, and I was just sketching around. And you can see like a rougher application of a lot of the graphite. One of the things I was kind of excited about at the time was kind of getting the value hatching to kind of go across the forms that I was working on, and like also be an indicative factor in the drawing. So like if I was kind of following across the pectoral, I'd try to kind of mirror the form that I was drawing on. So like if I was creating value across the thigh, I would consider like hatching across each kind of plane
contour line
of the thigh. Exactly, right? But trying to use actual values, or to infuse the actual values with those contour lines.
Now you said that was a stage? You don't always do that?
No, I was just saying I was interested in it at the time. Okay. There's a lot of times when in fact like hatching specifically doesn't even really come into my work. Like if I'm working on something I know is going to be really refined. Yeah. Like it's a portrait commission, or it's just a portrait that I'm making that I know has to be refined. Like I'll be a lot more particular about the technique that I use to kind of get across the forms. Okay. For me, maybe there's like kind of two kinds of drawing. There's drawings where you can execute. This drawing has a destination. I have to get it to that place. Mm-hmm. And there's drawings that are just purely explorative, right? That all I want to do is I want to find stuff out about what I'm looking at. And so when I'm doing that, I think the technique winds up taking a little bit more of a back seat. And I'll take more like kind of chances in terms of how I depict things, hatching across forms in a way that is totally non-visual. I'm okay with that, right? It's explorative. I'm finding out something about that thigh and the forms of that thigh, the expression of those forms by doing this. And so I'm on board with it. I wouldn't do that again, like in a drawing that I needed to just execute. If I needed to show up, make it perfect and go.
Yeah, your rendering is a lot more subtle. The hatching probably just gets in the way, right?
Yeah, I used to like go through times where I'd like take starts like this into like a really refined place, but eventually just realize you're kind of working against the grain a little bit. Yeah, and your life would be easier if you just kind of started with the right technique. That's why I like separating those two in my mind. I think it's kind of interesting, because I feel like strongly that explorative drawing is huge for people learning to draw. Like it's almost drawing in a consequence-free environment. Like it doesn't have to look like anything. And I think learning, you spend very little time in that mindset. You're always worried about the next project being good, being better, being an improvement. Yeah. But like a lot of times the mileage that you need to develop with your materials, with graphite, you need to work in a consequence-free environment to figure out what it will and won't do, right?
Did you keep sketchbooks? That's kind of what I feel sketchbooks are for, is you keep some sketchbooks to present to people and some that you do just for yourself. It's not to show people, it's just to mess up in. An experiment. Yeah. Did you do that at all? Or did you just do that on Bristol paper?
This is effectively a sketchbook.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the thing is also like at the Performance Academy, we always work vertically. And so sketchbooks, I always kept a sketchbook for like compositions. So if I'm doing like little doodles and things that I'm just thinking about, what is the shape of this portrait inside of a picture plane? How do I want to arrange the head? I'll just do little sketches. They don't have to look good and stuff. So they are kind of consequence free, but I also don't think of them as something that are kind of representative of like exploring technique, right? Yeah. This is just like, I'm just fiddling and figuring out something that's it's neutral to representation. Whereas this, I feel like there's a lot of ideas in here that kind of carry through to representation. Sketchbooks were more about ideas and evolving ideas, more so than involving sort of technical or technical evolution.
Okay. Right? Yeah.
But I mean, again, I understand that's just kind of a personal thing. That was like my take on sketching.
Do you have any sketchbooks here?
Do I have any sketchbooks here? Yeah.
Can I see one?
Oh God, they're horrible. Like these are little sketched ideas.
Okay.
None of them are interesting.
Okay, so this is developing just thoughts. You got a lot of words, you're just kind of quickly throwing down an idea, and this has absolutely nothing to do with rendering form. Yeah. It's purely...
It's like purely just, I had this thought, like I want to evolve it a tiny bit. Great hand on this one, by the way.
I knew it was a hand.
And some of them
got the point across.
Some of them will get even a little bit more detail, where I actually start kind of planning out a painting, cool. Thinking about like where I'm going to have different value zones and different kind of color zones. I mean, this is a painting I never even made. Like I might make it one day. Like I usually have kind of ideas years and years before I really kind of create the big narrative work. Yeah. Like a portrait, of course, is a portrait, and you can, with enough experience, you can draw a lot out of it just with an immediate reaction. But if you're trying to get something that is evocative in a much larger way, it's involving textures and colors and different things, for me, those ideas like take a long, long time to evolve. Yeah. Like the painting that if you're listening or watching this, the painting you probably already know of mine, the girl with her glowing finger. But that idea I had for like 4 years before the actual painting. Before the actual painting happened.
Now that you've shown this on camera, I'm gonna take all of these ideas you wrote down.
Yeah, this is great. I'm
gonna paint this.
This is another fantastic evolution that never goes anywhere yet. Like so, just this? It's
That's
just
cool.
This is a portrait of a sculptor named Jules Dalou, and he's French, and so I'm pronouncing that horribly.
And is this a drawing of a sculpture?
This is a drawing of a sculpture by Rodin of
a sculptor.
Ami Jules Dalou. Yeah.
And he was a sculptor.
He was a sculptor as well, yeah.
Wow, it's like so many levels.
Yeah, it gets deep.
And then we're going to be showing a video of a portrait.
Precisely.
Of a drawing of a portrait by a sculptor of a sculptor.
Exactly. But it taps into also like I would say that my third drawing education came from drawing sculptures. Drawing Rodin sculptures in particular informed so much of my thinking about how to work with a figure. Yeah. Probably the first one was like working side size at the Florence Academy. It was my first drawing education. Second one was actually starting to make didactic drawings for the Florence Academy, which I did. I spent like a year worth of weekends doing 5 stages of a cast drawing. Mm-hmm. That's used at all the studios now.
That's nice too. Let me see.
This is a couple of figure studies. This again, I know it doesn't look like it, but all of this, the serratus interior was entirely outlined. The external oblique, all the muscular forms that you see running through this were outlined at one point before I actually worked with shadow and light and halftone in order to sort of bring them into kind of a visual place. Yeah. And it makes for a drawing that just in the end I feel like kind of connects well, has integrity to it. There's other drawings that can have that as well, but that was my sort of route to get to it. Also, something I did with this one that I was doing for a while that I thought was very interesting actually is I would actually stump over, and I told you I have my stump very saturated with graphite. I would actually stump over everything inside, right? Mm-hmm. In a sort of a mid-tone, like a value like this. And then I'd work in kind of both directions. So I break down a really broad highlight through the form, and sometimes kind of bisecting the form. And then I could go back in with my stump and actually create the shadow edge. And by the time I'd used shadow edges and highlights, I had a kind of a mid-tone that created transition, which I thought was kind of a nice effect in some of these areas like this.
Yeah. Beautiful. This makes me want to draw.
It's again, me too. Like I gotta look at them like, God damn it. I gotta go back into that,
Oh. Well, it's in a different way. It makes you want to draw.
This is like a portrait I was doing I got halfway through. I think I did it during a workshop.
No, that's cool. I really like the hatching on this. Because back here, I actually don't see it very much. They melt together to actually form this.
Yeah. This was the goal with this one really, is I wanted to kind of show the students I was working with like how value can be interpreted, right? Like in one world, we could just take this shadow and treat it like this and just say, oh, well, it's a very flat shadow. It's dark and I want the form to be in the lights. But like the shadows also can contain a lot of form and structure. So the whole idea with this is that any value that I put on, I wanted it to be kind of mirroring the planes that it was being drawn on, right? So showing as much as I possibly could by adding value, rather than considering value as like coloring in the shadow, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Which is like grates on the ears when you hear people say that. But so there's like this interesting, it's actually probably the most interesting stage of this. I've actually probably carried it further. It could be an interesting drawing as well, but like for me, this is actually kind of representative of a really fascinating idea to me. And it's how you can be really sculptural with hatching. Yeah. It's more like you think of like these old-timey etchings, like the kinds that we have on dollar bills. There's two like French drawing programs that like I'm aware of from the 19th century. One is made by Charles Bargue that we use at the Academy today, and it's very sort of shadow and light based. There's one before that, and I'm not sure the artist who did it, but it was very much made in this sort of like cross-hatching, like, or very ornate cross-hatching sort of form-based drawing.
Yeah.
And it's a whole drawing course, just like Charles Bargue's, but with a totally different focus. And the focus is more on how to show form through hatching. And eventually it went out of fashion, and so we have what we have now. But like this idea, if you integrate that into, your drawing that's kind of value-based, I think that the contrast there, again, that spectrum, I think is really fascinating. This is something I consider maybe a very loose sketch. We went to an open drawing evening with a few friends in Brooklyn, and we just had a model there, and we're just sitting, sketching on our laps and like having a glass of wine and stuff.
No, just nothing. Just kind of farted this one out. Yeah, that's why it's so...
the threshold gets raised, over the years. Yeah. I would have, 12 years ago, I'd have gone, man, the best thing I've ever drawn.
Yeah. It's very fashion. The hair, this like...
I had a huge influence from Fetchin. In fact, I would say that probably before my third drawing education, I think I was really influenced by Fetchin. I really loved just the aesthetic. I mean, you could just get a sense that he was like painting with that chaotic brush. You'd say that this is painted with a chaotic brush. I took the side of the pencil and just scraped it over to create a kind of diffused atmosphere that you kind of draw lines through, right? Yeah. But a really big influence from Fetchin. Eventually, I think influence is a fascinating topic as well, and I know that I felt this very deeply as when I was a young artist, because I was really heavily influenced by Egon Schiele. I think so many young people are, because it's so direct and so emotional, like his drawing. And I think when you saw my drawings at that point, it was so obvious. And I don't feel like I've changed so much from then. It's just now that influence is mixed with like 500 other influences. Wow. In a way that like maybe creates whatever version of me it is now. Yeah. But it's not that I, that I feel like I've made something out of whole cloth, that nobody has ever made a drawing with the ideas that I've made drawings with. Well, thousands of artists have.
I look at
but
your
that
drawings,
unique,
I know they're yours.
But that
you
unique,
have a unique style.
It's just a combination.
Right.
I'm telling you, it's like an amalgamation of all of these influences. If you took them all like one at a time, you could almost look through the drawing and pick out what I'm doing, like who, in a way, in a more finished drawing, right? But I'm not saying that that's a good or bad thing. I'm not assigning a value to it. But what I'm saying is like, in the beginning, I was mystified by how people had a voice. What is a voice? How do you get a voice? And the books I'm reading tell me technically what a voice is. Yeah. The understanding that I've come to, at least for my life, and it's relevant to me, is that it's just through constant influence that we all have. We go to museums. This painting, it made a huge mark on me, Yeah. I'll remember it forever, I every time I go back to the museum, I go to that painting. That's an influence. You're taking that in. Schiele is an influence. Fetchin's an influence. Taken on their own, they would be overpowering, but smash them all together, and you have like your kind of the mood board of your work in a way. Another sketch I did during anatomy class, just kind of focused on hatching and structure and trying to not so much refine things, but to just kind of follow forms around. And eventually, the thing is, like, if I did this over like 10 times, like spent, 10 hour-long sessions or whatever with a model, you could get to a really refined place with it. It's not that this has like a low ceiling of refinement, like a rougher technique, I mean. But again, it would be highly kind of laborious to go through drawings that way.
You know what I like?
Yeah, tell me.
Well, this kind of sounds stupid. It's like, you know what I like about this is these dirty spots. But no, this is a completely random thought. When I am drawing and I see some of this starting to happen, I immediately just take the eraser and start cleaning it up.
Yeah.
You left it all in.
Yeah, I kind of like it.
Show me the secret. How do I not be pissed off about that?
It started because I would like pre-tone my canvas or my paper with graphite.
Yeah.
And one of the things I noticed, of course, is that you have a kind of certain chaotic or uneven element to it. But then I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting, brush, so to speak, in its own way.
Yeah.
Like that little bit of chaos. And so I started then, like, even when I would draw on like white paper, I used to draw wearing a glove. I had like this really nice, no, like,
okay.
Not to prevent it, but just like, I would rub stuff with my fingers and stuff, and I know you don't want oil on it, so I just use a glove to do it. I don't do that much anymore, so I don't wear a glove.
What kind of glove would you actually use?
There's like a really thin, like neoprene glove that has like cloth on the back, so it's breathable, but it also traps like skin oil. But it was so I've only ever found them in Sweden this thin, so you could still feel. It to smudge. Oh yeah, for sure.
Oh, cool.
Like
rub latex. Glove.
No, not latex. Neoprene. It's different. Like they make work gloves like this, but they dip the bottoms of them like in whatever like coating, the rubbery coating.
Oh.
And then the back is mesh.
Okay.
And then it's dipped in that here. But this was like such a thin consistency that you could still feel the pencil under it. They're brilliant. And I haven't had one in years and years and years. I wore through mine. Like it was like, I was like, a street urchin with my little fingers sticking out of my glove. Long story, as usual, short. I would actually get a bit of graphite on my glove and just kind of rub around on the paper just to create a little bit of chaos to draw into. And then that would kind of lead me to kind of different effects. So it just started out by kind of cultivating it, and eventually I just stopped caring. And I kind of like that it's there. I feel like
I like it too.
It communicates something in the drawing as well. And then this one is actually the exception in all these. All these are in graphite. This is a drawing done in charcoal. I was using General's charcoal pencils and pre-toned this with charcoal powder as well. I think charcoal's great. It's a really direct medium. Also, some of the line quality that you get, like that Fetchon-esque line quality, is really difficult to capture in graphite. Mostly because graphite kind of sticks into the paper a lot more. A lot of these lines I can still craft and sculpt and hone. If I did that in graphite, it'd be pretty well in the paper.
Yeah, you could still take your thumb through that and get rid of that texture if you wanted to.
But like graphite, it would have these like points that it catches on the paper, and you get these really burnished looking like dark spots.
Wait, what do you mean? Isn't that what this is doing too?
Similar but different. Like you couldn't get rid of the graphite ones.
Oh,
You could get rid of or manipulate the charcoal ones.
Okay, got it.
So that's the difference for me. But really, it's and this is in no way a humble brag, but it's really I spend a 3-hour session with the model, and I just blocked in. I think it looks pretty cool, but it's far from a finished drawing. And also, I think I don't know if I would have chosen exactly like this pose if I was posing the model. Like I said, there were a couple students working, and I just kind of snuck in and was doing a sketch with them. There's just something like, I think if you have like this 3/4 lighting coming in here, I like to be like on the shadowed side of it.
On the shadow side?
Yeah, it's really nice
more
because you get this kind of Z-shaped, like, heard it called the Van Dyck Z, right? If you go to the National Portrait Gallery in London and look at everything in the 19th century section, that Z shape, they're all looking at Van Dyck and his portrait compositions. And it just creates like a lot of drama and a lot of structure. Like here, you really have to like actually use a lot of halftone in the light to kind of pull the nose out from the front plane of the face.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't usually choose like this lighting on this like direction of a pose.
Okay.
Like if I was setting up the lighting of this, instead of the lighting coming in here, I would probably have it coming in here. So like this would be more of a halftone plane. You'd have more shadow within the socket here, probably a clearer kind of shadow under the nose.
If you were to keep this light though and this pose, you would sit more through.
Yeah, I would have sat like on this side of it, kind of looking into that. I mean, you can have cool looks on the other side as well. Like, it's not that you wouldn't, but I just find that one's a little bit more dynamic and interesting.
Cool.
And now we're getting to maybe some of the more like slightly more finished ones.
Oh man, this is cool.
Yeah, this is an exercise I cannot recommend enough.
This was in class for a student demo?
This is, I was doing workshops out in Long Island. And so we had this model and I'd set her up and then I'd put like a sculpture stand next to her so that the skull is in as close to the exact same lighting as you can get the portrait in, right? And then we draw her while she was up and models work on like maybe 20, 25 minute sessions, right? And then they need to get down and like stretch the bones and stuff. And then we draw the skull during that time. So it was a really kind of intensive like workshop, no breaks, you're just drawing the whole time. But what eventually, the point I wanted to make to them, or I wanted them to grasp from this experience, was how, like, especially in the areas of the face which are more thinly kind of veiling the skeleton, the actual shapes of highlights, for instance, come directly from plane shifts that happen in the skull, right? Yeah. So we have this the very simplified structure of the skull, right, is side plane, front plane, side plane. So you have two thinner, slightly more triangular side planes and a broader sort of central plane, right? Now that also kind of turns back eventually, but the first model that we can work with is three planes. At the Apelles line, in between that side plane and center plane, we get this highlight shape, and it mirrors exactly the movement of those planes that eventually are, of course, joining to the top of the skull. And we see that here, on the live model. Even as bored as she looks, she's still alive. Skin and fat and so on. And also, like, the highlights along the zygomatic bone here, those shapes are directly mirrored inside even a relatively fleshy part of the face.
Yeah, but not even just highlights, halftones too, like the brow ridge, the step down into the nose, same rhythm across there shown, and then highlight going up the nasal.
Yeah, you got the nasal bones, the glabella, you got all these like little halftone shapes, all these little echoes and mirrors like back and forth in between. Even looking at the chin, right, the mental protuberance here and where that turns, that shape is just like a softened version of the mental process here on the mandible.
Yeah, wow, that's great.
So do this a few dozen times, and the skull becomes like a really real resource to you when making portraits. And then, of course, this is like a lot more of a kind of refined drawing. I've kind of taken it a lot further. A lot of the halftone shapes are a lot more kind of refined and things. I've looked a lot more deeply, like into the eye, for instance, created contrast and focus. I mean, that's like when you get into like drawings that you're taking a little bit further, you start to think about like focal areas and how, the means that you have to direct people's attention. You could say that, nominally that there was a rule in portraiture that the composition is usually about the eyes. When you meet someone in a room or you look at the person that you love the most in the world, you often find yourself looking into their eyes, right? Like we're doing right now, Stan. We're talking about composition. We're talking about getting a portrait that is drawn to have a similar experience to what it's like to look at somebody that you're spending a moment with. Because really that's what's happening with a portrait, right? Yeah. It's a representation of a person. You'd like to meet them on a very human level. You're going to meet them looking at them in the eyes. So we need to think about, in terms of the tools we're using, how do we compose that? How do we create a representation of the figure where you are drawn to their eyes? Because there are a couple immutable sort of features to composition. If you have strong contrast and you have a sharp edge, your eye is going to be drawn there, right? Yeah. So if in this picture I use the strongest contrasts and the sharpest edges around the hair, then I'm telling you that that's the most important feature. That's where I want you to be looking.
Well, you do have the strongest contrast, pure white, pure black, but the edge, you've kind of broken up the edge.
You diffuse the edge, yeah. And I mean, in a situation like this, of course, where you do have a bit of like a head on a light background, you're going to wind up with some edges. Yeah. Hopefully what you're able to do is use a third maybe feature, which is to say like rendering. It also kind of draws attention. Mm-hmm. So if you combine strong contrast, sharp edges, and the amount of detail in an area, generally speaking, you're going to find yourself there.
Yeah, the fact that these are two extremely simple shapes. Yeah. It's like it might draw me in, but I leave immediately back in here. Yeah. Just because there's nothing interesting in here.
Yeah. So you think about those three spectrums and how you're using them. This is how you kind of create composition in a very simple model, which is portraiture, right? Like it's kind of a head on canvas, right? Like maybe you got some shoulders or something. But you want to create drama, you want to create interest, you want to create a picture that meets somebody on a human level. You want to direct people towards the eyes. You can flip those on their head and you can say, think about the effect that you create if you totally obscure the eyes, right? If you say the eyes are totally like lost, I take all the detail out, it's all soft edges, the contrast is very light, and then I put it somewhere else. Exactly. Now, what does that do, kind of, not emotionally, I don't want to say, but like, how is your reaction different to that than to something that has a more refined sense of the eyes? It's complex, right? Yeah. But it's coming from manipulating kind of the same three factors. I can at least speak for 2D artists, those three factors. 3D, maybe there's other considerations as well. And even in the 2D world, I mean, you can't oversimplify things and say that there are only really three things you're manipulating. There's a lot of stuff that happens, but like you want to say at the least at the baseline, organize those three features in your drawing.
When you're thinking about focal point composition, that's probably...
Again, well, talking about artworks where the figure, has the eyes sort of obscured. This is actually a riff. It's a very unflattering self-portrait, but it's a riff on, and everybody tells me I made my nose bigger, and I actually did on purpose.
You made it pointier.
I made it pointier. I made it more like kind of the hook-shaped nose that I would love to have, but I don't. I have a more sort of rounded off nose. I made it a little bit more like Dante's in a way.
Bulbous.
Yes. But there was a portrait by Sargent of Monet, excuse me. And the profile goes in the opposite direction. But I was at the show at the Metropolitan a few years back, and I was there with another artist called Ramiro Sanchez, and he was a teacher of mine in Florence. Really great guy, great painter. But he was talking to me, but he's steeped in the classics way more than I ever was. Like, he grew up, playing the viola at 6, that kind of upbringing, Jesuit education, like all of these. So he was, deep into classicism when I was listening to punk rock music. And so he was just talking to me about like compositional tropes, like in terms of portraiture. Like, so if you think about what a profile is, you're hiding half of the face from someone, right? Yeah. The viewer only gets to see half of the face, at most one of their eyes. It's inherently a kind of mysterious way to look at somebody, right?
Yeah, it's like you're spying on them, kind of.
A little bit. It's a bit voyeuristic, right? It's a very different feeling, and it creates the impression of somebody with a very private world. You think about the opposite of a person looking you directly in the eye. Mm-hmm. They're here in the room with you. They're staring at you. They're experiencing something with you. Someone's looking away. Their eyes are obscured. Half their face is hidden. It's necessarily a little bit more of a mysterious picture, and it's of someone who is then also a little bit mysterious, right? So it was a self-portrait for a show a couple of years ago or something, and I thought, well, I want to do... As an artist, you're so often like out there. Your emotions are out there. You're teaching, you're lecturing, you're doing stuff. You're always like putting yourself out there. And I just wanted to make a self-portrait that was a lot more like, private or mysterious. It actually reflected maybe a little bit of my personality. Mm-hmm. Because I don't always want to like meet everybody's eyes or always be out there, always be an extrovert. So that's kind of the what I was trying to conjure up in this one, at least with the composition that I chose, and also hiding, my eyes from whoever happened to be looking at it, creating a bit of a different experience.
I really liked it. Like, I was really drawn to this drawing because of some of these more abstract, eraser pick out shape that really kind of wants your attention, but works really well with it because it wants your attention, but it's really close to the focal point too. Mm-hmm. So it works. I like this one a lot. Yeah,
it was. I don't do a lot of self-portraits these days. When I first graduated the academy, it was like the poorest I've ever been in my life. I never had money for models. It's just self-portrait after self-portrait. I totally burned out on wanting to paint myself. And then this is a drawing. It's one of the last drawings I did, I think, when I was in Sweden. Again, I just kind of, there was a couple students, one drawing from here and the other drawing from there, and I kind of set my easel up a bit behind them and drew. And I was just kind of working on, rhythm and how to kind of use line to kind of communicate things in a drawing. A lot of the hatching in this does that thing I was talking about before, where the actual hatching kind of follows a lot of the planes that the hatching is on. And you can see, like, I've taken it to a more kind of resolved or refined place here. Mm-hmm. Than say like in another drawing that's a little bit less resolved, like some of those sketches I was talking about. And this even could, you could push this even further. In some drawings I've done that where I've gone from really, really form hatching all the way into like a total resolution. And this is maybe like, 3/4 of the way there to where you have like some sense of transition and softness of form.
Some sense. Getting pretty.
You have also a certain value statement to it where the lights seem light and the shadows sort of fall away a little bit. But again, you could really evolve this or push this drawing forward still. I just kind of like the raw sense of it that I had, and also a lot of that chaotic stuff that you were talking about in the background stays. But this is actually I've sanded away at the paper here.
You sanded at it?
Yeah, you can use sandpaper as an eraser.
Oh, was this an ink wash?
No, this is graphite.
It is graphite. So why couldn't you use your eraser?
I don't remember. I think I had I don't know, I might have dropped a pencil or something, I hit it, or I got something on the paper and I just sanded it off. But I've used, in other drawings, I've used sandpaper actually as an eraser, to bring back highlights. Like if you stain something with ink, right? And I used to do like an ink wash, but then if you wanted to get the value up without using white chalk, you can actually sand away, depending upon the grain of the paper. If you have a super, super fine, hot press watercolor paper and you sand it, it's going to become quite apparent. But if you're using something like a Canson Meton paper, which has a little bit more fiber to the surface, you can sand away lightly without really creating too much of a textural difference.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
Sanded, yeah. Was it, you use super, super, super fine sand?
The same stuff that I used to sharpen a pencil like this, really fine grit sandpaper.
Okay.
Thanks again, Stephen, for that awesome sketch tour. I liked those so much, I actually bought a few. There's more Bauman coming up, and even more on Proko.com/Bauman, where I have his full masterpiece demo in all its 11-hour glory. It comes with a 3-hour refined cut as well, if you'd prefer to watch a condensed version. So head over to Proko.com/Bauman and have a look. See y'all next time.